I'm going to do one of the most demanded things. I know people always say that, oh, I've been inundated with like 20,000 emails this week, folk asking for us. In this case, it's a steady trickle of people asking over years. And yeah, including students, like how to arrange, how to get the most out of the parts you've got, how to get something from a loop into a finished track. This is classic stuff. And arrangement traditionally is one of the hardest things for people to get right, or the hardest thing for people to nail. It certainly took me a long time to hone my arrangement skills, but now I've got a pretty good handle on it, I reckon, and can give some general pointers as well as things which just particular to me, of course, but we're all different. But yeah, hopefully this will give you some clues. So here we go. I've got a track here which is already finished, already released, but I've just taken it back down to the loop phase the way it is in a loop format. I'm going to make it a bit bigger so we can see exactly what's going on. Okay, this is all the parts of the track, 9 parts. So not too many parts, quite simple. I've chosen it because it's not overly complex. The way I arrange, the way I work is I tend to use a lot of, I tend to use a lot of plugins to create dynamic effects and to create transitions and to create tone changes, and that's enough. So I tend to work with fewer parts but try and make those parts go a bit further, and I would say that's probably quite a good way to go. It creates cohesion because then you've not got too many disparate elements coming in all the time. So yeah, that's the first thing. Keeping it relatively simple, not overloading yourself with options, but also having enough options to make it work as an arrangement, and that just takes a bit of honing, I guess. So a quick rundown of the parts. We've got a sequencer part, like a fast running part like this. We've got a keys part. Okay, that's a little keys part. We've got a pad part, which you can see here, down here in the MIDI. We've got a sub bass, and then we've got our kit parts down here. I could put the kit parts in a group. Normally, if I was arranging, I probably would, but I've kept them all separate here so you can see them. But all of these parts here are kit parts. We've got a kick. We've got a kind of a sample kit that I've made using Kima. We've got rim shot. Again, a MIDI part that I've created, and then let me just delete all the automation so we can add it later. Okay, so yeah, I've got another percussion part there. It sounds like that, and then I've got some hats down here, noisy hats. That's it. Super simple. Now this is about arrangement, so these parts are actually, it's kind of ideal because these parts are all being turned into audio much earlier on in the process when I use them for a live show. So as a result, it means we can just focus on mainly on the arrangement. There is a place when you're arranging to talk about making extra parts so that you've got like another part to use, like adding a few notes here and there to like up the game or whatever, and I'll explain that as well. So here's our loop as it is, as the complete thing, and we'll work out how we want to start. So that's pretty much it. So a few things worth mentioning. After I've got the parts I think I want, the next thing I'm going to do is work out what effects I can use to create variation and interest. And while I'm writing these parts, I'm also thinking, okay, what can I do to this part to make it more interesting? So in this case, I've got, if I play just this one as a good example, this is the alto. I'll put it up on the screen here so you can see it. So alto is my favorite single synth. And yeah, it looks confusing on that, but don't worry about it, it's just got usual synth stuff. But yeah, I've picked out some automatable parameters here which I liked the sound of. So let me do a little change. So at some point I came across that as a usable sound change. So it changes from like a nice bleepy high thing into a much more mellow kind of sound. So that's my first, so I've made a note of that, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll use that later. And maybe I'll like just put a placeholder there so I remember. Something like that, and then that's my change. It's also got all these other things. It's got a wave shape change, which is creates a brighter waveform. We've got a delay feedback, which is as you would expect. And because it's alto, it's got a lot of personality. And it's also got a filter cutoff, which is again quite distinctive to alto. It has an unusual filter, very strong, and it's like, yeah, anyway. So a filter cutoff, like super simple. You know what you're getting there. Okay, very resonant filter. Okay, so things like that. And for each of these parts, I've maybe picked out a few things which I need to change. In this case, I've got a filter on the ARP 2600 over here. And I'm not using most of the controls. I'm keeping it really simple. It's just a favorite string sound. I've got again the filter which comes with the ARP, which has got a very strong resonant tone. Hear that? And then I've got another plain filter which is just for controlling the pure cutoff, you know, so there's no sort of personality about it, and I'm using both of them because at different times both of them are useful. Okay, so you get the picture. I'm creating a few variations for each sound so that I know what I want to do with it. In this case, I've got another synth, I've got another cutoff. I'm just deleting all the automation here. Delete automation. Okay, VCF cutoff. That's it. I could be more imaginative there, but I didn't need it. I've got a sub, I've got a kick, got a scoosh. Okay, all these, and you can see there's like relatively little effects on these. I've got a thing on the Ryo kit. I've got this thing, Baby Audio Transit, which is really good actually, very useful. In this case, it's just adding a little layer of added interest on top. So if I play that on its own, it's creating that little on top, and that's it. Just a little bit of added interest, a bit of stereo interest on it. Okay, so to arrange, what I'll usually do is I'll work out what I want to start with. So how to begin. In this case, I would usually not have pads and strings in the beginning. I tend to like to save them for later, but I'll show you another way of using that as well. So let's start off with, let's see, let's try this without the hats. Without the sub maybe. Okay. So the main thing is being efficient, making sure that I'm saving parts for later. So these parts don't change a huge amount, but I'm going to make sure that I don't use them all at once. So I'll spread them out to start with by 16 bars, like these squishy kits I call them. These. Okay, these are being done with Kima, so they've got a certain amount of processing involved already, and they're just slightly different, a bit more complex. So you get the picture. So I'm going to start for the most simple one, which is my usual way. I tend to work in a slightly progressive way in terms of starting simple, building more complexity, and then coming back, that kind of thing. Just what sounds good to me. So yeah, so I'll start off with those. That'll do. And I'll drag everything else out of the way, and I'll unmute everything. I'll just pull things across like this. I'm using Logic, of course, but you could do the same thing in Ableton, although I pity you because I find arranging in Ableton to be really tricky, cumbersome, I would say. you can't move things around so easily without accidentally deleting or copying things, and I know there's ways of doing that. And you also haven't got alternative tracks, which is such a, I mean, you have got alternative tracks, but they're, again, cumbersome, not easy to use. So I'll show you track alternatives as well, because that's also very handy. Okay, so let's take that. We'll have maybe, 16 bars, and then maybe I'll bring in my rim shot at 16 bars. And I'll probably use the cutoff as well, why not, right? Maybe back down again. Okay, that's the thing I set up earlier. You can hear that tone change, but we're not going to use that yet. We're going to use that later. So that felt like I actually could have brought this in earlier. So let's just pull in the 9 bars and see what else we want to use. Maybe bring in the sub at 16 bars. So now let's try the keys part, and I think this will be the one. And this is a good tip, is to make a part go further. Here you can see I've written a keys part. It's got quite a lot going on, so what I might do is just keep it simple and not use maybe the top harmonies. Let's just see what that sounds like, so that way I can make it go further. Also, when I make a change, I'll always change the color, so that I can see at a glance what I'm using. So let's have a listen to this. Okay, so this is also what I like to do, is I let it play and I arrange as it plays, and then I can just go back and change things later. But it's quite a good way to keep the flow and keeping the mood, so you're actually hearing it the way that a DJ or someone else, if in this case it's a club track, so the way a DJ is going to hear it. That way you can kind of instinctively feel what you'd like it to do next. Like, would I like to raise the tension here? Would I like to drop it back again? And do it that way in real time. Because the more you turn it into an intellectual exercise, the more you're likely to go wrong. If you keep it in the feeling place, then you're much more likely to get it right. So just keeping it playing, and then just adding things as they're needed. I'm going to bring in the bass with the new part. I'm also going to try this an octave up the second time. So I go here, and I pitch it up an octave, change the color, Okay, I've reached a point here. I can hear that's flowing nicely. That's good. Now I want a change of tone. If I just keep going like that, everyone will get bored, me included. So a change of tone, but keeping consistency as well. So I'm thinking, okay, I'd like to drop back a bit. This is where I think I'm going to use that control I had for the alto, where it drops into a different register, because that will work to kind of focus the attention, drop it back a bit, take away some of the energy, but also you keep it going. So I'm going to keep the kick in. This is what I'd call a tightening section. So something where I'm just like removing some of the melodic elements, but I'm keeping like the parts which have clout, which have a bit of hit to them. So for me, that's the bass, the clap, the kick. It sort of focuses the attention. I'll take the hats out. I could probably keep the scush in, but I'll keep the simple scush cut in. So I'll trim everything back, make everything much simpler. At this point, I might also reuse the simple keys from the beginning, but I'm going to try it without first. So let's have a listen to it, like leading into that break, see what it sounds like. Bit of delay into a break always helps. Okay, so it's dropped into a different mood. Now what I can hear is I'm actually thinking these hats will sound really good if they're like fading in on top of that increasing bass. So you're focusing attention, but you also maybe have the hats come in but fading in. So we'll drop the hats back to 0. And here, you can see this is something I did in the track. I've got a gain plugin. I never ever automate the volume on the track volume. It's just like, it just makes life so much more complicated if you automate that, because then if you ever want to change the whole track's volume, all of the tracks will obey except for the one where you've got automation, which will just snap back to where it was. So always use a gain plugin or a utility plugin in Ableton, whatever the option is for your DAW. Okay, so I'm going to drop the gain down to 0. So instead of taking the part out, I just take it down to 0. Okay, like that. So it comes to the break, hat drops to 0, but then I just fade it up again. Now, this gain is very see I've left my delay on here, so I'm going to turn that off. This is the delay I wanted only at the beginning, really, so I've left it on by accident. A send delay, like sending that to this magnetic, like at a break. This is a classic transition weapon, a tool, because it just creates a softness over the transition. So we send it over the break and drop it back again. You won't hear it very well there, but it just adds a little bit of a delay over that break, which makes it sound more musical. Okay, so then we'd like, okay, what am I going to do with my cutoff when this part comes back in? I'll bring it back down. This part needs to change more as well, this sequence part, so I'm going to continue, give it more variety. Okay. Now, I've done a bit of arranging here. I brought those keys back in, and now I'm thinking, actually, they would be better off the other way around. It's better to have like the softness of the pad creeping in underneath the the new parts. So we've got bass, got it stripped back, and then the pad's going to come in. It's going to kind of sneak in, but nice and soft. Okay, sounds better with just the top one there. And keeping the pad in instead, sounds better. Okay, you might come to this point and you think you've got all the parts you need, and then you've come across and you're like, I can do something else to lift the mood here. In this case, yeah, I can imagine doubling up one of these parts. So you could just be like, okay, I'm going to create a new part. I'm going to double up these key sounds and just find another synth to go on top, and that way it gives you another layer of energy. Bringing things up an octave is another way of doing it. So I'll add another octave to that as well. The plus 12 is the other octave. I'll change the color slightly so I can see it's different. Let's get another synth up. I'll use Digits, which is one of my favorites, and I'll just use an old classic grit choir, which I love. Okay, so this part on its own, I'm actually going to raise him up another octave. To me, that's too low. Okay, we're going to really add some extra energy that way. Okay, another thing worth mentioning here. See how I doubled that part there to create another dimension to the same part to give me a little lift there, to more energy. Equally, when I pull out the original part and just leave this one, it still sounds musical, but it's also different. So it also gives you somewhere else to go. You're dropping the energy again, but you're keeping the melodic part going, so it still maintains interest. And equally, what I might do is just drop this part, the pad part, and try playing that with the same synth. See what that sounds like. I'll lift it up another octave again. Let's just see what that sounds like as a comparison. So keep the pads, instead of using the keys sound, we're going to use the pad part, but change the sound. Okay, apart from it being far too loud, yeah, it's also changing the mood too much for me, so I'm not going to do that. Okay, so here I'm kind of thinking about the flow of the whole song. Like, what do I want to happen? I've got this big pad sound. At some point I want him to come out, but I'm going to keep that going, and then I think I'll just bring him out after this. Maybe like that. So he's high in the mix, he's dominating. Let's get him out around about there. And I'm thinking about the end of the song now, so aiming for, I say we're at 4.5 minutes. So yeah, everything's looping quite happily along the place. Let me just keep these looping, in fact. Keep the core parts looping. Another thing I might do, just the way I've copied that part into a new sound, as I'm arranging, I might be like, okay, well, what about the sequencer part? I could actually change him over to a new sound as well. So let's try that. Copy that part to a new track. Again, I'll use digits. It's a nice simple synth and it sounds great. So, and I'll use like, okay, a straight bit square. Here we go. This is like a SID chip style sound. Let's see what this sounds like, where it's just like changing from one sound, this one up here. So I'll move them next to each other so you can see them more clearly. It's exactly the same part, but just changing the sound. And we'll see how that sounds coming down, change of mood. Couple of things there, a couple of wee tricks. One, I like the way the hi-hat sounded when they faded in volume. So I just simply copied the part with the automation over here. So again, the hats are doing that thing where they're sort of creeping in underneath. And another thing I did was I dropped that sequencer sound by an octave at that point. To me, it just sounded right. It sounded like it could do with just a change of tone and a bit of focus, and that will kind of make it sound more powerful. What I might do is bring that hat so it's faster to do that. So again, instead of cutting the hats, I'm just dropping it down to 0, and then it's fading back in underneath these parts. And then that's kind of the end of the track. So and that's another what I would call a trick, if you want to call it that, is also bringing in parts you used at the beginning and using them at the end. So again, a cut down version of the full one, and using that as a kind of like lead out. So your ear's used to hearing those parts, but it's hearing them in a more simplified form. And yeah, if you want, this has then got like an arc shape. So the arrangement's like building like that. It's the most common way for me to work, but you can of course totally change that. Different people work differently. You might have a Rob Hood track which starts full, everything all at once, and then just little undulations for the whole of it. It doesn't change, very tracky. Also valid. So there's no rules, but in this case I've chosen for like an arc. And you know, each of the parts then fades out to whatever, and that's relatively straightforward. Once you've got to this point, I think most people can work it out, you know. It's like you fade each part out, it's kind of come to an end. But yeah, using parts in the beginning at the end, altering things by an octave, super simple. And creating parts, duplicate parts with a new sound, just to change the tone, just to change the mood, but to keep the kind of flow. And I'm also using the sub as a kind of, as a supporting thing. So when I want to make an impact to an area, I put the sub underneath. I take it out here. This is another important principle of arrangement actually. Here I've got all these parts running, no problem, nice. I've stripped it back, it's nice and strong and loopy. And then here I've got the pad sound coming in and the second kit sound. So I know that because I'm introducing something new, I can also take out something that's been in for a while and save it for later. In this case, I'm going to take out the sub here because I know that it's going to be really useful to have that coming in later as a kind of reinforcer. So there's a bit of horse trading, if you like, as well, where you like take something out, even though, you know, you could keep it in and keep the energy, but if you've got a new part coming in, swap it out, and then you've got another option for later, something to keep it going. Okay, I think that's the best I can do with this for now, because it's quite simple. And I'll do another track at another time, which will be have a different complexion and a different kind of set of rules. But some of these things are fundamental, I would say, to how I work. So yeah, so hopefully that's of use to some of you. Cheers.